It seems pretty clear at this point to me that Joe Biden is probably not going to be the Democratic nominee, that there's been a kind of a tipping point that's going to play out in the days to come. And I almost feel a little bad for Biden because he wasn't that bad in the George Stephanopoulos interview on Friday compared to the debate. He was actually, I think, significantly better. But people are now realize they're judging him on such a low bar and have so little faith that he can come back and defeat Donald Trump. And I think the media, in a kind of remorse because they didn't actually put more pressure on this question earlier in the reporting, has now swung in a direction where they're basically just nitpicking every single phrase, looking for some signs of mental decline, that I just don't see how this is sustainable. And I think that's a good thing. I think the Democrats are a lot better off rolling the dice and at least giving themselves a chance of beating Donald Trump, since I just don't see how Joe Biden could change the dynamics of this race and make it a race about Trump, because it is now really a race about his fitness to serve. And even many of the people who agree tend to agree with him ideologically just don't think he is. But what I thought was interesting about the Stephanopoulos interview that's gotten less attention was what it revealed about Biden's mental decline and the kind of how old he is, but more just about the way his thinking is very old. And I think this is a problem that still hasn't gotten enough attention. This is a man who I think, when he thinks about America's relationship to the world, is really in a Cold War paradigm that I've always thought was very, very dangerous. And since the war in Gaza, it just seems to me even more so. So in that interview, when he was trying to tell George Stephanopoulos why he had been a good president and why Americans needed to reelect him, if you notice, the thing that Biden kept coming back to again and again, he mentioned it 6 times, is NATO. He says I was the guy that expanded NATO. He talked about what he's doing in Europe with regard to expansion of NATO. I'm the guy that put NATO together. He says I'm doing a hell of a lot of other things, like wars around the world, like keeping NATO together. Who's going to be able to hold NATO together like me? He talks about NATO again and again and again, and it seems to me somewhat disconnected from reality. Where is the chorus of people in America who want to be expanding NATO? I think that morally the case for defending Ukraine was a very strong case, but it's really clear at this point that that policy on Ukraine has not really been a success. Maybe it was a success initially in preventing the Russians from taking Kyiv, but the sanctions have not basically been able to get Russia to stop this war. And Ukraine is closer to losing than it is to winning, and there's going to have to be some peace agreement that's probably going to leave Ukraine worse off than it was before this war. And so I think that this notion that what he's falling back on again is the fact that they kept pushing NATO forward rather than, in retrospect, thinking that maybe actually some kind of negotiation with the Russians, at least in retrospect, might have been a better deal, just to me suggests a disconnection from reality and a way in which this Cold War kind of great power, competition really dominates Biden's way of thinking about what his purpose is as president. He also talks that way about China. He talks about the South Pacific Initiative with AUKUS. This is with the United Kingdom and Australia, to get them these better nuclear submarines. And he says, we're checkmating China now. He never mentions climate change. He's a Democratic president when he's talking about the most important issues and why he actually does have some accomplishments on climate change. He never mentions that. He never mentions the word Gaza. He does say he has a peace agreement that's coming with the Middle East, but this is, again, seems to me completely delusional, right? This notion that there's going to be some peace agreement that's going to bring us towards a Palestinian state when the Israeli government is vehemently opposed to it, and when the Biden administration is not willing to exert any pressure to make it happen, right? So, to me, what struck me about this interview that made me even more relieved that I think we may be headed toward a new nominee is that a new nominee could rethink this paradigm, that Joe Biden is not just old in terms of his age, and is not just experiencing mental decline, but his paradigm for America's role in the world is so much a kind of repeat of the Cold War, with this kind of moral Manichaeanism between America and its enemies, in which the world is just automatically a better place when America has more power, and it's just assumed that America is standing for these values like, the rule of the international liberal order and these kind of things, even when the war in Gaza that America supported has made a complete mockery of that now in the eyes of so many people, and in which it's more and more obvious that climate change, not geopolitical competition, is the existential threat to the world, and that needs stronger international cooperation and international institutions. Now, this is not what Trump is saying, of course, but Trump, in a way, at least is recognizing and responding to, even, in his kind of horrific and disastrous ways, the sense that Americans have that actually they don't want to be fighting another Cold War, right? That they actually they want a less costly form of intervention around the world, even though, again, he has no moral code and he doesn't recognize climate change and all these things. But there is at least a possibility, I think, that a new nominee, a younger nominee, less formed by the set of experiences that Biden has been formed by, perhaps with a different set of advisors, might think anew a little bit about America's role in the world, about the war, about the relationship with Israel, about the war in Gaza, and with a less Cold War driven view of foreign policy. And that would be a kind of a change that would mean not only that we were getting someone who was younger and had more energy and who was mentally sharper, but I think someone who was more in touch with the genuine threats and the genuine realities that America faces in the world today.